And welcome back to Doctors.
But not doctors.
We are your hosts, Dr. Patrick Armstrong.
I'm Dr. Christopher Silverstein. Thanks for tuning in wherever you get your podcasts.
Exactly. This podcast is available everywhere fine podcasts are sold, just not so far on YouTube, Patreon, or anything involving Apple.
It's on YouTube.
Oh, it's on YouTube.
We're
on YouTube. Look at that! We're conquering one market after another.
I think you can see who does the editing here.
Yeah.
So, yes, we're on YouTube, and we'll be expanding later. As you should know, we are, we're full-time employees either of ourselves or of other places. So we're going to get this done as often as possible. We're going to try and get as many of these to you as we can.
We make no promises, either about the quantity or quality of our product.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's what you like to see when you're, listening to things and consuming goods and services.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Upfront, honesty, authenticity. This is what I've learned from Donald J. Trump. You should never, ever promise to do things and mean it.
This is true, which brings us to the first topic. Now, today we are going to be going over the inauguration speech and some of the executive orders that have been submitted by Trump, and we're also going to be talking about scrutiny through public inquiries, which is a big issue here in the UK right now. And effectively, is it better that it's done through an independent judge or independent chair, or should it be handled through Parliament?
Or should it be done as it is done in America by not being done at all?
Not being done at all.
Yeah.
So, let's start with what we were talking about on our first episode, Trump's inauguration. So we actually now have an inauguration speech.
Yep,
We've had the inauguration.
Yep, it's dropped. It's dropped.
Yes.
Like a baby.
Yeah. Yeah, it's dropped. It's most definitely dropped, and we're all living in this space now, which is the beginning of the Trump presidency. Yeah. And now we said in the first podcast that we ever did, what do we think is going to be in his inauguration speech? And definitely Make America Great was in there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that to be fair, that was like the center of the bingo card.
Yes.
Like, you can, that's a freebie. You can just sort of assume that one.
But how many people had Gulf of America?
I didn't have that. I did not see it coming. And so, can you explain for our listeners exactly what this joke is about?
So Donald Trump, in his eminent wisdom and perfect knowledge, has decided to make America great again, that he's going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Now, just to clarify, Chris, the Gulf of Mexico is the large body of water that is south of, Florida and Alabama and Mississippi, and borders a huge swath of Mexico, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it has been, if I'm not entirely mistaken, known as the Gulf of Mexico since the 1600s.
The 1600s, I believe you are correct. You see, most of that body of water touches Mexico or Central America.
I see.
And most of what is now Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. Most of that was part of Mexico at some point. Spanish Florida, for example.
That's true, actually. That's a
Texas.
literal point. Texas did used to be part of Mexico, and Florida was definitely part of the Spanish Empire.
Yeah.
So
it's not outrageous to call it the Gulf of Mexico. It hasn't hurt America at all, and hasn't hurt America for the past 200 and something years.
We have survived. We've managed to get by pretty well without. Well, okay, but so we're going to change the name to the Gulf of America because that scans so well, obviously, Gulf of America. It's just music to anyone's ears.
And it lowers the price of eggs and gas. And it helps with the cost of living crisis in America, because people will know that, eggs are going to go up by 38% because of a bird flu, which we're not allowed to talk about anymore if you're in the federal government. But the Gulf of America, I mean, out of everything else that you need to remember from the inauguration, the Gulf of America is what you need to take home to your empty refrigerator.
Exactly. You can eat your nationalism.
It's delicious.
Yeah,
it's free and
slimming.
filling.
Slimming at the same time, Chris.
You are both filled and yet consistently hungry
for more America.
For more America, the Gulf of America.
Exactly.
And we can't continue on without noting that throughout most of the inauguration, and I'll be fair here, I didn't watch it live because I couldn't do that to myself. I know that we've seen how Donald Trump speaks. We've seen his rallies.
Yeah.
There's absolutely zero way that I'm watching it live.
I mean, the thing is, Chris, I would have watched it live myself, but there was this paint that I had to watch dry. and it was going to watch itself.
And I hear you got grass in the backyard you need to see grow.
I did, and I did see it grow.
Hey!
It did happen by at least a millimeter.
That's great.
Yeah, I know.
I feel perfectly happy with the fact that you watch grass grow, because we can watch it later or watch clips of it online. And one of the most famous clips that are coming by now are things like Hillary Clinton openly laughing at the Gulf of America, like just openly laughing in his face,
because it's
the president of the United States, who has so many things to worry about.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Oh, one of my priorities is changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America."
Here's my question, right? Like, do you put in a form for that? Is there like who do you apply to?
Well,
to like change to get everyone else to agree that this has happened, and not just you saying it and then hoping it catches on, like fetch.
Fetch. Stop trying to make fetch a thing. Took me a second, but I did understand that reference. So when the country changes the name of a thing, it's just the federal government or the executive, doing that. So companies don't have to do it. Other countries don't have to recognize it.
Right. It's not a law. It's not like exactly. It's literally just, from now on, Ron DeSantis will be referring to the Gulf of America, and everyone's going to have to take a second to be like, the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
Got it.
You mean the Gulf of Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And everybody will just say, "Oh, right, of course, that's your little thing for right now."
Yeah.
The issue that I think it's most aligned to is that there's other countries that'll call different countries by different names.
Mm-hmm.
So Inglaterra, a lot of
Indeed.
In either Portugal or Spanish, you don't always have to say United Kingdom. Sometimes they just say Inglaterra for England.
Yeah.
And they know what they're talking about. And the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland doesn't force every other country on earth to recognize that specific name on all of their maps.
Well, that's because we're not tiny little weasel men.
We just can't do it.
Exactly.
Exactly. We don't control other countries and their maps. No company has to agree to this either.
Right.
So Google hasn't changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
I don't. If it does, that'll be a sign of the apocalypse. That's how we'll know that the entirety of the American upper crust has totally been suborned into the new fascist overlords, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what we're going to find out. We'll see how that works. But I think we spent enough time. Oh, let's just cover one more issue about this speech. Now, we said it was going to be too cold for Donald Trump, and we were proven correct, because it would be too cold because there wouldn't be enough bodies in the mall to keep him warm on the inside.
Exactly.
So we did also say that he'd be too cold for him to be outside. He'd moved the inauguration inside.
Yep.
He had a rally the night before, I believe in Capital One Arena. But even if that was a sellout crowd, it's not going to be nearly enough to make the mall look like it is heaving with support with Donald Trump.
Exactly.
And the following day, where you actually had people coming out to the mall, we're talking about smatterings of people. Smatterings.
I saw the picture. It was not impressive. It was not a very large number of people compared to the amount of space that we're talking about here. It was exactly the kind of optics Donald Trump was, I think, desperate to avoid by moving it inside, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did manage to avoid that, but I mean, in the modern history of inaugurations, his will look the weakest.
Yeah.
He doesn't have these throngs of Americans, or tourists, obviously, but obviously Americans, packed into the mall between him and the Washington Monument. As he gives his great speech, as
this was not
everyone else did.
The thing is, right, in terms of like the history of inaugural addresses, right? When you had FDR, for example, giving his address in 1932, the whole point was to demonstrate that this is, the entire country coming together to demonstrate unity. The large crowd is there. It's all done in public because it is a public transfer of power, and we live in a republic.
Yes.
Right? So with Donald Trump deciding, oh no, this is going to be a private event.
Yeah.
And who's going to be attending the private events?
Ooh, who did attend those private events?
Oh yeah, the entire front row given over to, who was it, Chris?
3 billionaires?
3 billionaires.
The 3 richest people on
3
earth.
billion. Well, I mean, also, what's his name? Sundar Pichai, I think, the guy, the head of Google.
And the head of Google.
Yeah. He's around a billionaire. He's billionaire.
Okay, so we had Jeff Bezos.
We had Jeff
and
Bezos.
Elon Musk.
And Mark Zuckerberg.
And Mark Zuckerberg, who were, and this was pointed out, I saw this on other coverage, that they were given seats above the cabinet.
Yes.
Which
is new.
Which is a big, big deal because everything about the presidency is image, and everything about the inauguration is even more about image.
Exactly. And what was the story being told by these images, Chris?
The story being told by these images is this is my real cabinet. This is who I'm going to check everything through because they're going to help me and I'm going to help them.
Yep.
If you're part of my cabinet, you are subordinate. Yep. I'm not going to listen to you. Your job will be to carry out my will.
Exactly.
And every person that he's put forward for the cabinet seems willing to, do exactly what he says without question.
Well, every person that he's put forward for the cabinet has been someone who is profoundly unqualified to do it.
That also.
And that brings us to an interesting point that I think we have referenced before, which is that it's a known pattern for authoritarian leaders.
Yeah.
Specifically to stock the offices of state with people who are deeply unqualified. Now, obviously, this can have some negative ramifications, right? You put morons in charge, they're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Things are going to go poorly. So why would a leader want to do that?
Well, the reason that you want to do that is because they are in hock to you. And they know that they can't get a job anywhere else.
Exactly, right? If they get fired, they're screwed.
If they get fired, they're done. And obviously, everyone's going to see that they're trash.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a huge problem if you actually are of substance and want to be in his cabinet.
Yeah.
Which is why most people of substance probably stay way the hell away from his cabinet.
And why he would not at all be willing to bring in someone who did have substance. Someone with substance who knows what they're doing, who's in charge of one of the offices of state, is a threat to him.
Yes.
Because he's an alternate. That person, male or female, but this is Trump, so male, would be someone who could conceivably say no.
They could say no and carry power with them.
Yeah.
Which is obviously the antithesis of what he wants.
Exactly.
So we've covered the inauguration.
We have done.
And we are aware of what's happened. And we're not going to talk about Elon's Nazi salute. That's the thing. That's a Nazi salute that happened.
That was a Nazi salute. It did happen. You can, if you disagree with us, please argue long and hard in the comments, and we will not read them.
Yeah, go ahead and support the Nazi salute if you want to.
Yep,
but
exactly.
It's a bit ridiculous.
I am going to say that the head of the Anti-Defamation League,
oh yeah,
trying to say it was an awkward gesture. We don't know what he meant. We should all have a little bit of grace. You are the head of the ADL.
Yeah.
Your job has been to say that college kids protesting violence in Gaza are raging anti-Semite Nazis.
Right.
And then a guy throws out not one but two Nazi salutes. And all of a sudden...
Hands up.
It is impressive.
Quite literal, hands up.
It is impressive. Hands up.
Quite literally hands up. And they say, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Let's just move on to the next thing,
yeah.
which is its own craziness. But
yeah.
we could probably spend some time on that in the future. Maybe we talk about Elon Musk and his influence. Because
let's bracket it.
Yeah, let's bracket it. Because he's definitely had issue both here in the United Kingdom and the United States.
Yeah.
But let's move on. So after Trump becomes president, officially, brutal. He then signs several. We're talking. I don't even know how many executive orders.
It's many.
The most,
many.
I believe, in the first day of any presidency.
Yeah,
a lot
shock
of them
and awe, I think, was the phrase they were going for.
A useful phrase for Republicans because it's gone so well in the past. Yeah, it's a useful strategy.
I mean, to be fair, when shock and awe was used during the Iraq War in 2003, it worked like gangbusters at disrupting the Iraqi army. The problem was with everything that came afterwards because it was a total clusterfuck. And there may be a parallel to the events of the day. I don't know. I'm not competent to make that claim. But I'm making that claim.
Ooh, not even allegedly. All right. So I picked out some, but I think there's only one we got to talk about. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of the others.
All right,
because there's so many egregious ones.
So
I'm going to kind of glaze over a few of them. He ended the ethics requirement that people have to sign an ethics, effectively, oath to work in the federal government to say, I'm going to work for the federal government, not for a party.
Yeah.
Got rid of that. So that's a huge, huge red flag.
Oh, yeah.
He got rid of farmer price caps.
Yep.
Immediately.
So you can pay more for your drugs.
Yeah, the drugs you need to survive that Biden had capped at $35, I believe, for insulin, things like that. Trump immediately got rid of that, is now claiming that something bigger and better and bolder is coming, probably in 2 weeks. And then...
Yeah, right along with Infrastructure Week.
Right along with Infrastructure Week and his new healthcare plan. But in the interim, healthcare companies are going to be making tons more money now. tons and tons and tons
Look,
of money.
okay, now you might think that that is just an indication of the fact that he wants Americans to suffer. But I will have you know,
Okay.
the reality is Martin Shkreli, Farmer Bro,
Oh.
supported him very highly, and lots of very wealthy people in the pharmacy industry supported him with a lot of money. So really, this is him paying it back.
That's him paying it back, not paying
Yeah.
it forward. Now, paying
No.
it forward would be ridiculous.
Oh,
And
exactly.
if you have the support of a guy named Martin Shkreli, who hiked up, I believe, HIV medication or AIDS medication to make
It was
sure.
it was insulin as well. It was
And
it was a
insulin.
bunch of things. It was a lot of things that people desperately needed to survive. So he knew he could just rinse them, and then he did until the entire nation turned on him and said, "What is your problem, man?" And then he kind of hid for a little while.
Yeah, you're a
and went to jail.
subhuman monster, and he
Yeah.
said, "Well, that's just how business is." Which technically, he's right. If you are in a business and you realize that you can charge a lot more for the things that you're selling, and even better, the people you're selling it to need it to live.
Exactly.
Then there's
Exactly.
no limit to how much you can charge
Right.
them, and frankly,
Which is why
he should get off his back.
Exactly. And this is why we need to privatize things like water. Because water, everyone needs water to live, and that's why they should be able to charge you $50 a gallon.
You know,
Yeah.
one day we'll be able to privatize air, and everything will be better.
Exactly.
That's probably the main reason Musk wants to go to Mars.
You're right, because then he will control the air supply, and everyone will have to pay him with their Mars bucks.
It's like Total Recall. We'll
Yeah,
get into that later.
Yeah. Oh my god. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
remember?
what Elon Musk is doing. He's doing a Total Recall.
Well, who's
He
gonna
saw
be
a
our
Total
Quantum?
Recall as a kid.
Yeah.
And he has never gotten over it, has
I'm
he?
sure he's seen many things as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I never got over seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger's eyeballs start to pop out of his skull during the end of that movie.
Yeah, I didn't watch that
that was-
until
oh,
I was
that was-
much older.
That was a rough.
Yeah,
that was a
terrific.
rough special effect. Yeah.
So let's talk about the big one, the one that we discussed on our last pod, which is
Yep.
the elimination of birthright citizenship
Yep.
to people who came into the country illegally,
Immediately eliminating or purporting to.
trying to.
Because exactly, putting forward a thing saying that they no longer recognize birthright citizenship, and saying that they're not going to be handing over birth certificates. They won't be issuing any government documentation that reflects citizenship status gained through being born
in the United States.
in the United States. Yeah. Now, what's funny is that within 48 hours, that had already been basically delayed by a judge.
Yes,
Yep.
there was a Reagan era judge who decided that that's nonsense.
Yeah,
because
and
it's unconstitutional.
his questioning of the lawyers was particularly instructive because normally judges are, judges. They're very careful in their language. They are willing to entertain arguments, even if they seem a bit outside, if there's a legally colorable argument to be made. And the judge's response was to say, I have never in my 40-something years on the bench seen an order that is so clearly unconstitutional. And when he asked the government lawyer, do you think this is a constitutional order? And the guy replied, yes. The judge's response was, I have no idea how a lawyer who passed the bar could make that argument.
Wow.
Yeah.
Once again, we're seeing the quality of Trump lawyers. As we remember during when he tried to take over the country.
Oh, yeah.
And say that
Oh, that little thing.
Yeah, that thing where he tried to
Yeah.
overthrow the government and have himself installed as an authoritarian dictator. His lawyers were trying to put forward a lot of the similar crazy arguments where judges had to you'll know the phrase better than I do, where they had to basically say, the judge would ask them, as an officer of the court,
Yeah.
are you telling me the truth?
Yeah.
And if you lie to me right now, you're going to lose your license to practice law.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, actually. What a lot of people don't understand about lawyers, and I'm saying this as someone who is a barrister in England and Wales, not a lawyer in the United States, so I'm not going to make any legal arguments regarding that, but I will say that the whole point of a lawyer, regardless of the legal system you're in, is that you're an officer of the court. You have a duty of candor to the court. You cannot lie to the judge, because if you do, you have no business being a lawyer, and the
Right.
legal profession will turf you right out. And which is why, of course, Rudy Giuliani is no longer able to practice law.
Correct.
Yeah, he has been disbarred precisely because he got up in front of a judge, lied under oath as a lawyer, when he swore that, oh yes, these claims that we're making, we have strong evidence behind them. We have reason to believe that this evidence is true. When he knew that it was all fake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he lied to the court, he lied to the country, and he is one of the few people Well, he's one of the few people that are currently dealing with the direct impact of having lied for Trump.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
lost. He's apparently lost everything,
Well, yes.
which is fair because he tried to partake in a coup.
Yeah.
So
You know. What's funny is that the reason why he's lost everything isn't actually his work in the coup per se, but rather the defamation trial that was launched against him. Because in the process of trying to overthrow the government,
yeah.
he made a lot of claims about two election workers in Georgia,
Oh,
I
that's
believe.
right.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and identified them by name, claimed that he had video of them,
Pulling out
yeah,
suitcases full of
right,
votes or something.
suitcases full of votes, and handing over a USB full of extra votes.
Yeah.
And the USB was, in fact, a stick of gum
Ooh.
that the one of them was giving her mother, who was the other one, because
Yeah.
it's a mother and a daughter, giving their time for our country. So obviously they're enemies who must be crushed. And the suitcases of votes were just cases of votes. That's the votes. That's how the votes are stored. They're stored in those cases. That's how you keep the votes secure from the voting machines into the actual voting room. Which anybody who's ever studied anything about the process would know, which means that the lawyers who were claiming otherwise absolutely knew otherwise. And and hence why they found themselves in trouble with the bar association.
Well, yeah, and so we realize that this is what the issue is with a lot of these lawyers. But let's get back to the executive order itself because
Yep.
I believe it creates an enormous paradox.
Oh,
So the
love a
text.
paradox.
Now, I'm not going to go through the entire text, but the executive order hangs everything off of what you talked about in the last podcast, which is those not subject to the jurisdiction of the United
Yep.
States. Now, I believe that somebody who probably got the lowest grade in law school ever, or took a law course as an undergrad,
Yep.
basically decided that, oh, illegals must not be, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Therefore,
Right.
how can they have, we can just kick them out without having any birthright citizenship. But surely, if it's deemed that that the United States doesn't have jurisdiction over them, then what law have they broken? It's like
Yeah.
like a French police officer coming to New York City and trying to arrest somebody for breaking a French law.
Well, you can't do that because you don't have jurisdiction. That's what lack of jurisdiction means. You're right, Chris.
So if
Yeah.
I don't have jurisdiction over the person, then how do I kick them out? Under what law do I kick them out?
Well, what you could say is that you are removing their license to remain inside of the country. So, for example, if you are a diplomat, you are not subject to the local laws, right?
Right.
And so, if you were to, speed and get caught speeding, you could not be arrested. You could not be fined. But the government could say, well, you are persona non grata. You are no longer allowed. That actually is the phrase, by the way, for a diplomat who's getting turfed out is persona non grata.
Oh yeah.
Which I love that phrase.
It's a great phrase.
Right?
Yeah.
But so if we're thinking about, undocumented immigrants as being not subject to the laws of the United States, they can absolutely be removed from the country with no problem whatsoever, but they can't be arrested.
Well,
Because they are not subject to the laws of the United States. So, well, under what process would you arrest them? They would have committed no crime because they're not subject to the laws of the United States.
Right.
So, yeah, like literally, I think you're right about this paradox. It makes no sense.
it creates this huge problem. So
Yeah.
obviously, the Trump team believes that the Supreme Court will back them on
Yeah.
this particular idea, but in backing them, they will have created this paradox because as you go to arrest a person who was born in the United States as a legal citizen, and then you take away their citizenship rights, you're leaving them in this almost untouchable bubble. And we have to ask them, I guess, politely to leave, and they say, "I don't even recognize your authority to touch me."
Yeah.
And then I guess they go back to court and say, "The United States has no jurisdiction over me."
Right.
I
And
don't.
so,
It creates this utter quagmire.
well, it's absolutely perverse is the thing because Trump has spent so many years talking about immigrant crime and the case of that poor woman Laquan Riley, right? Laken Riley.
Keep going.
Yeah. So she was murdered. The person who murdered her was an undocumented immigrant. He was caught. He went to jail because he had committed murder, and that's what you do when people commit murder,
Yeah.
right? Except that if their legal theory is right, they've kidnapped him and are holding him illegally. And also, he cannot have committed murder because he's not subject to the laws of the United States. So therefore, the murder of Laken Riley must be freed immediately according to this legal theory. which would be a problem if law meant anything to the Republican Party now. And unfortunately, I don't think it does.
No, I think the MAGA party, as I call them, they're no longer the Republicans. They're
Yeah.
just the MAGA party trying to instill the
Yeah.
first American dictatorship.
Yeah.
But but in doing so, they're just creating this nonsense
Yeah.
that we don't have a history of like this kind of nonsense in the country. So how
Yeah.
do you like of this level? Like how do you? I don't know how the Supreme Court like legitimately backs up the concept without understanding the paradox they've created.
I mean, I would never put it past the
Neither would I.
yeah, the
I mean, they could
conservatives
do
on the
with
Supreme Court.
yeah.
That's the thing. I don't think they're super worried about law. I don't think they're super worried about like how does this make sense as a system. I think what they're interested in is, well, what's the thing that helps us the most right now?
Yeah.
And that is subject to change, and we will change it as it happens. So if they put forward a precedent, and then that precedent ends up biting them in the butt,
Yeah.
they can always just change it. They can always just say, oh, never mind, actually, we're wrong about that, or this is different in some way, so going forward, it's going to be this rule until that bites them in the butt, and then they'll change it when someone brings a case at that point.
But in the interim,
Yeah.
think about the precedent that is being set by the president being able to unilaterally remove constitutional rights to a small group of people, but
Oh, it's horrific,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely one of the stepping stones towards fascism. I don't think that is a problem for Kavanaugh. I don't think that that's a problem for, quite frankly, a lot of the Republicans on the Supreme Court. Because I don't think they believe in law as a thing that exists outside of politics. But the funny
Yeah.
thing is, for a long time in political science, there is sort of an argument about how we should understand the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Whether or not law is simply politics by other means.
yeah,
And generally speaking, that has been an approach that's been favored by left-wing academics who are very much interested in the interplay between power and law. What is law but power reified in a sense?
right.
Whereas right-wing academics generally viewed it as, well, that's horrific. You can't say that because if you say that, then law is meaningless. And we
Correct.
can't have that.
Yeah.
What's funny is that now the right wing on the Supreme Court has decided that, oh no, the left was totally right. It is pure politics, and we're the ones who are deciding what the politics are.
Yeah.
They found a weapon and now they're using it.
Yeah, it's basically they pretended for decades that
Yeah.
the law is sacrosanct and we're going to play by the rules, but totally knowing
Yeah.
that once they got in the right people in the right places
Yeah.
to flip the switch and basically this is the big play, this is the last
Yeah.
5 yards,
The
maybe
mask
even
comes
the last
off.
maybe the last yard, maybe the last inches before they get to the goal.
Yep.
And the problem is that they haven't taken over 100% the judiciary because they had the blockage of this executive order immediately.
Exactly.
But obviously it can be appealed up to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
So we'll have to wait and see if the Supreme Court basically finishes off America.
Yeah.
They've already started with the Trump can do whatever he wants law.
Yeah, the decision that presidents are actually elected kings. That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't see that one coming before they literally did exactly that. So
Yeah, that was their last. That was kind of their last test
Yeah.
to see if they were going to be part of America or part of MAGA land.
Yeah.
And they all jumped on board with MAGA land that the president has unilateral power to do almost anything that he wants, as long as it is quote unquote an official act.
Yeah.
So we are living in a very scary times, obviously.
Yeah.
But for right now, we have these are some of the executive orders that Trump has signed, put into place, and all of them are either helping billionaires,
Yep.
or trying to instill an authoritarian state.
Yep.
None of these, and I repeat, none of these lower any prices,
Yep.
do anything to help your grocery store. In fact, I believe one of the executive orders prevents federal agencies from talking about bird flu.
Oh, yeah. Oh, which is great because we're in the middle of a bird flu problem with our chickens,
Yeah.
which is causing egg prices to skyrocket. So this is a circumstance where you'd want competent people
Yeah.
in charge of the relevant agencies to be able to manage this crisis and reduce the price of eggs. So obviously we're putting RFK Jr. in charge of Health and Human Services, and we're making it illegal to talk about bird flu problems in the food industry. So this is going to go great.
Which is, of course, one of the typical things that happens when you have a Republican government. Remember, of course, DeSantis,
Oh yeah.
who decided to
Oh,
eliminate.
Ladapo, the guy who put in as Attorney General of Florida, right?
Well, we might be talking about two different things.
Oh.
Climate change.
Oh, yeah, of course, the climate
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
So in Florida, and I forget what year this was, but basically DeSantis decided to eliminate the concept of climate change from Florida. So
Yep.
a state that has been hit year after year after year by Category 5, Category 4
Yep.
hurricanes can't talk about why it's happening, just that it is happening.
Yeah, it's great. I am from Florida, and I can tell you that every once in a while I go back to Florida and I go to the beach and I see how much less beach there is.
Yeah.
You can actually see, over a long enough time frame, the land being claimed by the ocean. And, which is fun. Because, who doesn't want to live in the sea?
Who doesn't want to live in the sea?
We live in a pineapple, Chris.
Like under the sea, though.
Right?
I mean, it's me and SpongeBob.
I'm already named Patrick. Seriously, we're halfway there.
We are. Tremendous. I
Yeah.
mean, we have the idea that the Republicans or the MAGA people tend to advance is almost always just forget it exists and go back to the mines. You know,
exactly.
And we'll see how long that works because of the people that they typically hurt the most. I mean, the target is almost always the minority communities, like LGBTQI communities.
Yeah.
But almost always they hurt their own people way more.
Oh,
you know, trying to get rid of the ACA or Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, that's going to hurt a lot of Trump voters.
It's going to hurt a lot of white working class people who tended to support Trump much more strongly.
Yeah.
And not just that, also, the states that are most susceptible to natural disasters caused by climate change are Republican states.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I just read that it's $31 billion basically spent on disasters in red states in the last year, $7 billion in blue states.
Yeah.
So for Donald Trump to be threatening, the distribution of funds for natural disasters. In fact, what they're talking about is saying we're going to let the states handle small disasters where they pay 75% of it, and the Fed only pays 25%. Currently, it's the other way around, where it's the Fed pays 75% and the local state 25%. So loading up these states with this massive increase in costs is not something that these states can afford. Which means that you're going to see much, much, much worse death tolls, much worse recovery times in precisely the states that made sure that Donald Trump was going to be president.
Imagine Hurricane Katrina without FEMA. I mean, and FEMA didn't cover themselves in glory.
No, because George W. Bush had put a moron in charge of it because, again, see our first discussion of authoritarianism.
Well, there it is.
Yeah.
All right. So we have covered this for about as long as I feel like we need to.
I feel like we've gotten some good innings on it. Said a few things that were tart.
That were on point.
Exactly.
All right, and we're going to delve into, in the next section, public inquiries and
right.
all that. So,
but before we do that, Chris.
Oh, okay.
Is it not time for an imaginary ad break?
An imaginary ad break. Yes, I believe. Let's take a imaginary ad break, and we'll be right back. And we're back.
Welcome back.
So, in the last section, we talked about a bunch of things in America. Now we're going to talk about things that are happening closer to where we live.
Exactly. Across the pond.
Across the pond, which is currently underneath part of it, a massive storm.
Yeah, that's true. Storm Eowyn, which, can I just say, that is the most pretty name for a storm.
I know, it's too pretty for a storm.
Right? It's just Storm Eowyn.
Storm Eowyn.
Yeah.
Floating along the wind.
Exactly.
And the sea.
Exactly, right? Although, if I... Wait,
ripping across Ireland.
Oh, yeah. No,
ripping
absolutely just having her way with it, and it's not a pretty way, it seems at all.
It's like 140 mile an hour winds.
It's like hundreds of thousands of people without power at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is a hurricane.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things that we need to be able to talk about climate change because these things are happening way more often.
And they're going to happen way more often.
Yeah.
And we kind of need to be prepared for that, I feel like.
And this storm is just an effect from the polar vortex that was in America. So it's all connected.
Yeah, speaking of which, actually, apparently New Orleans is now under just like 1.5 feet of snow. Like,
wow.
Yeah, more snow has fallen in the last few days in the south than has fallen in the north since November, apparently.
And you know what else had snow?
Yeah?
Florida State University.
Really?
Yeah,
Aw, I
there's
bet it's really pretty in the snow.
a little bit of snow. Not so much that they'd have to, send kids home.
Well,
Which is a thing that happens at FSU from time to time.
Yeah.
Because
well,
they live in Florida. They have no idea what happens. If it gets below 40 degrees Fahrenheit,
What even is this?
there's still some kid trying to go to school in flip-flops and shorts.
Yeah.
But, that's why you have to send them home so they don't get frostbit.
That's true. That's true, So, all you 20-year-old college boys out there at FSU, we see you.
We see you.
We see you.
Put on some shoes, though.
Yeah,
Put on some shoes. Right. So, over the past several, I guess, decade, there have been big deal issues in society, such as grooming gangs, such as the post office, such as the most recent tragic murders in Southport.
Yeah.
And the result of all of these horrible things that happen in society have been public inquiries. Mm-hmm. So in America, we don't have this concept of kind of an independent investigation designated by the government. I mean, we can't.
Exactly.
We do have investigations.
We could do that, but we don't. What we do instead, Chris, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, is that we have some people say, well, this was caused by a terrible problem and we should look into it. And the other side say, it's too early to do that.
Yes.
Because you can't politicize the issue and then literally nothing happens so that it happens again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in the past, you've had commissions.
Yeah.
And you've had, investigations that were conducted, but almost always by Congress. Or probably in a state, it'd be done by the local state apparatus.
Well, in fact, there was the most recent congressional inquiry would have been the inquiry about January 6th.
Which was a select committee.
Yeah, which had a very specific purpose. It was able to gather a huge amount of evidence. It was able to put forward a report that collated that evidence into a defensible story. It was probably the best example of what a congressional inquiry is capable of.
Yes.
And it's very different to the kind of public inquiries that exist in Britain.
That's correct. So, just to give you some background on some of these things, grooming gangs, they were bands of men who were enticing young underage women to work for them and effectively do all sorts of horrible things to them. And it turns out these men were of Pakistani origin, but obviously not every Pakistani in the United Kingdom is doing this thing.
Right, no, but just in this particular locality,
these areas.
That was basically that's who was doing it in that area.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of look into the statistics basically about grooming gangs in general.
Right.
And where the information on sort of ethnic background and what have you is related, where it is known, it's the distribution's in line with the population basically. So about the same percentage of people who are white in the United Kingdom, it's about that same percentage of people who are in grooming gangs who are white, and so on and so forth. So what we're not seeing is any evidence of sort of an ethnic tilt there. But what we did see was obviously a recent resurge in claims that there was, thanks to Mr. Elon Musk, of the absolutely Nazi salute.
Yeah, he will come up again in a few minutes, but basically the grooming gangs thing started, this was of a story that came out in 2011 of crimes that had taken place from the late 90s. And the outcome of that was that there was a public inquiry into how these things could happen.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going into the details of public inquiry for that one because I'm not across all of them. But effectively, at the end of a public inquiry, there are recommendations, but there's no reason to follow those recommendations, because the important part to remember about a public inquiry is that the government has to sanction it, and they have a whole book in the cabinet office, which is kind of like, I don't know how to describe the cabinet office right now, but the cabinet office is an office of government, is one of the departments in government, and they used to deal with things like elections, and they used to deal with things like the management of government.
Okay.
And so these, the recommendations that come out of a public inquiry don't have to be followed by the government. The government basically has to be on board with the creation of a public inquiry, and afterwards they will say, well done, everybody, and a giant stack of books will be put up in a shelf, and that's the end of it.
So just to clarify, who runs the public inquiry then? Who's in charge of one?
The public inquiry is run by an independent chair.
Okay.
So but the chair is appointed by the government.
I see.
So again, if something horrible happens in to you or to a group of people, the government then has to agree that it's bad and bad enough that they want to spend lots and lots of money on a public inquiry. And what happens inside a public inquiry? There is a chair and there is a lawyer, and the lawyers bring in witnesses, and the witnesses are asked questions under oath.
Okay.
So they're not supposed to lie. And
So
then
it's sort of a judicial proceeding in that sense.
it's a sort of judicial proceeding, but it doesn't have to be a judge.
Okay.
The chair can be somebody who really, really, really knows what they're doing, but the chair doesn't have to be a judge. Normally, it is a judge to declare the most impartial person, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
So another. And I'm bringing this up also because we have an inquiry coming in the Southport killings, which is also horrible. And the reason that we're having another inquiry in Southport killings is because these 3 girls were horribly murdered by a. I'm going to call this person just crazy.
Yeah, he seems to have been a massive loner. He seems to have been someone who. Okay, so his parents they had fled from Rwanda because of the genocide, right? My understanding is that the guy who committed these murders, he was 17 at the time, was obsessed with genocide. People who are better at psychology and whatnot might argue that there's a connection there. I don't know enough to be able to say that that is the case, but it does kind of make sense, if anything. But yeah, clearly this is someone who had gone very wrong.
Yes, this is somebody who also fell through the cracks several times. Lots of warnings were placed about him. Lots of warnings were placed about this person to all the different authorities that were supposed to look out for people like this. But the the Prevent scheme basically is an anti-terrorism scheme in the United Kingdom. But the Prevent scheme is almost entirely geared towards religious extremism
and not towards just some kid on the internet hyper obsessing about serial killers or genocides and then radicalizing himself without an ideology, it seems.
Yeah, and so this is now deemed as a new type of terrorism, but this kid is just obviously, just crazy.
I mean,
is it new terrorism, or is it just the kid's nuts?
Well, I mean,
he did a horrible thing, and
we have this happen all the time in the United States, because in the United States we have school shootings, you know, and I think the difference between a school shooting and Southport is that in the case of the United States, school shootings involve guns. You can grab a gun, you can go and murder a bunch of people in a school, and then everyone will sort of know how to process that because we've seen it happen multiple times every year since the 1990s. The United Kingdom, guns are nowhere near as available. Stabbings tend to happen. What's interesting here is that here you had effectively a school shooter who used a knife and went to a school that wasn't his own. Basically, went to a yoga studio.
Yeah. So, the issue is that the kid, the person who did this, who is a teenager.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's a teenager. We are almost numb to this in America. Where here he's not, and also it's kind of hard to do pre-crime or prevent somebody from doing this, but you could have. But you could have, and that's why they want to have a public inquiry into what happened there and why this kid was able to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, because there is a program to try to catch people before they fall through the cracks. So it does make sense that you want a public inquiry or some kind of accounting of how this happened to prevent it from happening again. Because in this country there is a general understanding that these things shouldn't happen. It's not normal.
Yes.
And there are, in fact, some attempts to create a structure to prevent it from happening.
Correct. Which is why we have, again, public inquiries.
Indeed.
So one of the other reasons, and we'll focus mostly on this one, is the post office inquiry, which you might know as the Horizon scandal, or the IT scandal. But it's really important. This also resulted in a public inquiry. But I'll give you a little bit more detail here. Starting in about 1999, the post office here, which is different from Royal Mail. So the post office in the United Kingdom is it's like a store. It's a private store that people can buy into and run like a franchise. And so you could start one, Patrick. I could start one.
Wow.
But you got to buy into it, and then you effectively work for the Post Office Limited.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I did not know this actually. This
Yeah.
is new information for me.
So unlike in America where the post office is the post office run by the
Exactly.
government, and you
Yep.
go to a post office, it's just the post office,
Yeah,
right?
because the Constitution literally says there has to be one.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Once again, written Constitution.
Woohoo!
We'll see how much it helps us. Um, but in here, so in 1999, the post office came up with a new IT system that basically tracked how much money was going in and out of the different stores, and individuals who had basically bought into the franchise, almost like a McDonald's.
Yeah.
They had to tell the post office every week or every night, I don't know which one, how much money had come in.
Right.
And it was almost immediate that they realized that the system, the IT system that the post office had installed, which was created by Fujitsu, wasn't putting in the right amount of money. In fact, it was always undercutting them. It was all the amount of money was always wrong on the wrong end. So it always hurt the sub postmasters. These are the franchisees.
Wait, so just to clarify, you're telling me that the automated system had bugs in it?
Yes, the automated system had bugs in it, and people were able to identify these bugs, almost immediately.
Wow. Oh, I see. Wait, so the people in Fujitsu then, they understood that there was a malfunctioning with the system.
We're not there yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're not there yet. I'm talking about the
franchisees.
franchisees.
Okay.
The franchisees are putting in the money. They know how much money they put in. They hit enter, a different number comes out, and it's usually lower. And it shows that there's a difference between how much has gone in and how much has come out, and they owe the difference.
Wow.
So this is the problem: is that if this number stands, you have stolen from the post office or committing fraud.
Right.
And so all these sub postmasters, all these people started complaining to the post office, to which the post office said, "No, you're doing it wrong." They would call up Fujitsu and say, "There's a problem with my system. It keeps on telling me something's wrong."
Yeah.
And they keep hitting the button, and the number keeps on changing. And Fujitsu says, "Nothing's wrong." And here's another idea. Why don't you just enter in the right number? So after everything is done, why don't you just delete the number that the computers put in, and you just enter in what should be the right number?
Oh.
That was the advice from Fujitsu to these people.
Oh. Oh, no. I see ways that could go wrong, and I'm assuming that they did in fact go wrong.
Yes. So people followed the advice of Fujitsu and the post office and said, "Hey, I'm just doing what they said." And the post office is like, "Hey, wait a second. All your numbers are off. You owe us this amount of money. You owe us this amount of money. You owe us this amount of money. If you don't pay it, if you don't pay us back, we're gonna try you in court, and you're gonna go to jail."
Wow.
And some people did go to jail.
Wow.
And then a lot of other people, upwards of 700 people, had to basically agree that they were criminals, even though they knew that they weren't. They all had to get a criminal record.
Right. Now, this is a problem of private prosecutions as well, I understand.
Yes.
Because here, this isn't the police investigating, finding a crime, and then forwarding that to prosecutors, who then bring a case before the courts. Instead, this is what's known as a private prosecution. And this is something that people can do in this country, and in most countries, where you can actually say, I think this person's committed a crime. Here is the information on which I base that. It goes before a judge. And if you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then that person can, in fact, go to jail.
Yeah.
Which strikes me as an interesting problem here, because the judicial system itself must have failed. Because if the evidence that these people had been breaking the law was simply the fact that number one, the machine was telling them the wrong number, and number two, they were all basing their actions on the advice of Fujitsu and indeed the post office, it's hard for me to see how that would lead an honest and impartial jury or a magistrate to feel that that was enough to prove that they had broken the law.
Well, I'm not an expert in the cases. I only know what happened afterwards, because a lot of these guys came to members of parliament, including people like Marion Fellows, who was one of our MPs between 2015 and 2024. And this is when I started learning about it as well, because I had no idea this was happening, even though it had been going on since 1999. No one was paying attention to these people.
Right.
So that people like Alan Bates, who is quasi-famous here now, I believe he's Sir Alan Bates now.
Well, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office was a very stirring program that was made, but I think we're coming to that a little bit later.
Yeah. So they basically had to create their own defense and try to fight the post office. And the post office, and this is where it gets really, really tricky, the post office eventually found out that there was a problem. And Fujitsu eventually did, it kind of admit that there was a problem, but only to the post office, and the post office kind of knew, and then
And
they officially knew, and then
yeah.
but at the same time, they were still charging people for the lost money.
Oh, despite knowing for a fact that there was a reasonable basis to conclude that fraud was not occurring. And so when they would bring those kinds of cases, they would be effectively lying to the courts in order to throw innocent people in jail.
Yeah, and these cases were also being brought before Parliament, and this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the hook into what I want to talk about. They were
Yeah.
being brought before Parliament into various committees. I believe the Business Committee,
Mm.
and you don't have to. You don't really give testimony under oath in Parliament. You just give evidence. And the head of the post office and all of the top people at the post office were sitting in Parliament in the House of Commons in a committee room, and they were all basically just telling flat lies, huge
So,
lies.
just to clarify then, when they're giving evidence, they're not under oath.
You don't have to be under oath. No, normally you're not.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, are they under a duty of candor to the Houses of Parliament because they are, sovereign? Is that a law in this country?
No, I don't know, but there's absolutely zero reason why they would have to tell the truth.
Wow, that's a terrifying oversight.
Yeah, well, it's not just an oversight. It's part of the good chap theory. It's part of the, well, you're in here. You're gonna give us the best evidence that you want to give us.
Mm.
And obviously, Parliament does have, or the House of Commons and the House of Lords have the ability to, through the chamber, force somebody to come in and give testimony under oath.
Right.
That's usually very, very rare. Very rare. So, I'm not going to take you through everything, but eventually, in 2021, a public inquiry was created, and it ended, I believe, at the end of last year.
Yeah.
So the point that we were trying to talk about today, and we wanted to go into the post office one specifically, is it better for that public inquiry to take place independently, being sanctioned by government, or would it make more sense for Parliament or the House of Commons to have had its own inquiry? Now, in other countries like France, Germany, Brazil, and a bunch of other countries, parliamentarians can kind of their own accord create committees of inquiry. And they can
Okay.
create these things that look at stuff like this. And the reason I want to focus on the post office is because people knew about it since the 90s,
Yeah.
and they weren't able to get the public inquiry until the 2020s. And that's specific. That there's only one reason that could be is because no government wants to be associated with this mass miscarriage of justice and the amount of money you're going to have to pay these people back.
Right.
Some of these people's lives were totally ruined. Their reputations in their towns
Yep.
were destroyed. I mean,
Yep.
local post, like, so your post office is also a community center. People go there to pick up their
Yep.
state assistance checks. They go there to
Yep.
sometimes get tea and
They go there
cake.
to mail packages. Are you going to hand over a package that you want to send to someone to a person that you believe to be a thief? The person that you believe that you cannot trust? I mean, it really does. Like, you're right. That's a really central position inside of any relatively small community. To have that person be unjustly branded as a fraudster and a thief, that's incredibly corrosive.
Yeah, and so there are lots of people. There's people like I said who went to jail.
Yeah.
And these people went to their local MP. At the time, the one I believe for Alan Baines was James Arbuthnot, who is now Lord Arbuthnot, who used to be the Secretary of State for Defense as well, or one of them. And yet, even this guy, who is very high up in the Conservative Party, couldn't just unilaterally start, or even get a coalition of members to start
Right.
an inquiry. They had to wait for the government to start the inquiry.
Which would then be on the hook for any compensation that comes down. And you're right, that's a real problem of incentives.
Yeah, but also they're not on the hook for anything because remember, at the end of an inquiry, there's just a list of recommendations from the inquiry, and it's up to the government which ones they want to follow.
Right.
Now, this is why I believe that committees of inquiry or the ability for the legislature to initiate their own inquiries or investigations is better because you have the lawmakers right there, not all of whom will be, bound by the government.
Right.
Right, so they're not there to look out for the government. They're there to look out for their local constituents because these public inquiries are usually, they'll have a national impact but a very small local focus. So the Southport inquiry will be about a very local area in Southport,
Yep.
in England. The grooming gangs are kind of about communities kind of in the north of England, all next to each other. But
Yep.
but it's really more about brown people.
Mm.
And the post office inquiry, it had a much bigger impact, but only on specific people across the entirety of the UK. But the problem is that is it right that it took the better part 20, 30 years?
30 years.
30 years.
30 years, yeah.
For this public inquiry to happen. Surely it's far better for, if you can get enough MPs together to say, we need to start this thing, and we need to pay for it, and we need to get to the bottom of why this happened and what we should do to make it better.
So we have a few issues here that I think we need to disentangle. On the one hand, where does the money come from to run the inquiry? Because these things are expensive, they do cost money.
Yeah.
You've got to have people who can dedicate their time specifically to chasing down evidence, finding witnesses, being able to collate things, check them against the law, and realize what that story means.
Yeah.
So it seems that you would have to have some pool of money available. The government obviously has a pool of money available to it.
Correct.
It has the general tax fund and what have you.
Yes.
Where would parliamentarians who don't have the support of the government get that money, basically?
Well, Parliament also has Parliament can have access to money for parliamentary things, right? So if you wanted to create a new committee, Parliament would have to authorize the spending of money for that. But in the United Kingdom, it is a bit. Money in the United Kingdom is very much controlled by the executive, right? So any type of expenditure that the executive that for like a bill or something, the executive would have to approve it. But if you were talking about the creation of a select committee, Parliament could approve the expenditure for something for Parliament.
Okay, so they already have the legal facility to do that then.
They can, yeah.
Okay.
But obviously the government would want to have a say in whether or not it's going to happen. But Parliament is in control of itself.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
Like the government doesn't. I'm going to think and check myself here, but because I once wrote a bill. I once wrote a motion to create a committee, and then they said this committee was going to cost this much money. I'm like, okay, but they didn't say that it can't happen. They just said if this motion passes, that's how much it's going to cost.
Right. Okay.
So it's possible, but the standing orders of the House of Commons don't allow for. I'm going to take that back real quick. It's just hard to bring forward a motion like that. So if enough MPs got together and said, I want to create a committee of inquiry on this subject, you would have to get it onto the order paper. But Standing Order 14 prevents you from doing that because the government controls the order paper.
Delightful.
So it's difficult to bring forward this thing on its own, which is why the hypothetical is, should it just be already in the rules? Well, or if it's better. So, like, what are the benefits of the public inquiry? What do you think the benefits of the public inquiry are?
Well, that's the thing. Presumably, a public inquiry is going to be beneficial if it spurs action to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of mechanisms would we see that would allow for that to happen? Now, you said that there's no reason for the government to follow the results of the inquiry or the recommendations of it. I would argue I don't think that's quite true. There may be some reason for them to do it if it benefits the government to do so. In other words, if you're a member of the government and you're thinking, well, which of these recommendations, if any, do we implement? And you think to yourself, well, I don't like any of them because they're going to cost money and it's going to make us look bad that we didn't solve the problem earlier. But if I don't do it, it's going to look like I'm keeping the problem going. And I think that raises the balancing issue of how much of a political hit do we take from enacting these implementations? How much of a hit do we take from not doing it? And I think the reason why we saw such strong response to the results of the post office inquiry is precisely because of things like Mr. Bates versus the post office, because many people had been following this story. It had been brought to their attention. The manifest injustice of it was really quite was quite stirring. And the end result is that for, I think, the government of the day, the Tories, they saw it as, well, if we don't do this, we are absolutely doomed in the next election.
But that's just creating the inquiry. Now they also, I mean, they went the full way, and they created a compensation scheme.
Yep.
And let's not be too cynical here, but they created a compensation scheme and then called an election.
Yeah, they sure did. They sure did. Some may say there was a connection between these two events.
Yeah. So yeah, they were able to do it, but obviously, I mean, this affected both Labour and Conservative governments because obviously Labour, the Tony Blair government came in 97, so they would have been, right here at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
Then the Conservatives came in 2010; they would have been in the middle of this.
Absolutely.
And they just sat on their hands,
which is kind of perverse. You would think that if both of the main parties are, if both of them have real problems with this, right? then in a way, neither of them have a problem with it. You could just say, well, this is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that has, been a problem for the government as a whole, regardless of party. So therefore, we're the ones who are stepping up to fix the problem that both of us have created. That's a lot easier to do than to say, yeah, we caused this problem. This is all us, Saws guys. We're going to try to fix it. Sorry about that. And it's way, way easier to be the party that says, oh, well, they're the ones that did it, and we're the ones to fix it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so
that's way easier because, of course, in the United Kingdom and in most other countries, there's the infallibility of government idea from the current government. The current government never wants to be seen to be doing anything wrong, so they have to always project that they are correct.
Yeah, which would be great if it meant that they focused on not doing things wrong as opposed to pretending that they never had done things wrong in the past.
Yeah, or just... Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to turn that off. But they should also... But they should also just decide that sometimes things are going to go wrong, or sometimes I'm not going to get everything right.
Yep.
And I don't think it's bad for a government to say, hands up, we got that one wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're going to try and do something different.
Yep.
I mean, and you have to do it in a certain way, not like the Lib Dems did in the mid 2010s where they were in coalition and they just said, I'm sorry over and over again.
Yeah.
For, tuition fees and austerity.
Yeah. You get a few of those, you don't get like 20 of them.
And well, so. or you don't get one when you wait for so long. But we're getting a little bit off topic here, because I mean, obviously the next inquiry in the UK is going to be Southport, and now the government have been very quick with this, but I am curious as to their speed. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about at the beginning here is why one of the side effects of the Southport killings, and that was the summer riots.
Yes.
So. Word got around on social media, specifically X, that this crime had taken place, but it was declared that it was either an asylum seeker, a legal immigrant, somebody who wasn't supposed to be in the United Kingdom, and then bands of far-right rioters descended upon hotels where asylum seekers were staying. And they tried to set the hotels on fire.
Yeah, which, would be arson with the intent to kill women and children, which is, I think most legal systems would agree, bad.
Yes, it's bad, and people did have gone to jail for it. But the reason that this story took off is because people like Elon Musk drove the narrative that this person was a terrorist, asylum seeker. The person who did commit these crimes is a brown person, like you said before. But he was born here.
Yeah, he was born in Wales.
He was born in Wales.
Yep.
So he's not an asylum seeker.
Yep.
He's as British as the day is long. He's just crazy, evil, cruel, whatever.
Yep.
But he's definitely not an asylum seeker who's come from a different country who's explicit designs to kill.
If you had thrown out every single immigrant in Britain, it would have done nothing to prevent Southport whatsoever because it had nothing to do with immigration. So it's a little bit disturbing that you had misinformation being spread knowingly by Mr. Musk on X, resulting in a huge amount of violence and a huge amount of destruction of property and the potential for widespread death. And clearly that can't happen. Clearly you can't allow that to go by without any kind of response as a society.
But those riots and the interest in the crime seemingly have driven the speed with which this inquiry has taken place. The Home Office announced an inquiry. The Prime Minister came in the next day and announced even more information, basically repeating a lot of the same stuff. But they are going to extremes to be seen to be quote unquote doing something about it.
Absolutely.
Which brings us back to what we said before. Even at the end of this inquiry, where they're going to have all these people talking and all these lawyers and witnesses and all that, at the end of it, there's just going to be a couple volumes of recommendations, and it's going to be up to the government to figure it out. And so is it better that in this case the government moved very quickly, but sometimes they move very slowly. But the outcome of a public inquiry could be nothing.
That's
and one of the reasons that people are so angry at the grooming gang inquiries is because there are a list of recommendations that haven't been acted on.
That's true.
And now there's talk of creating more inquiries into the grooming games, even though there have been plenty of inquiries into this before.
Right, and a question, should it be a local inquiry, should it be a national inquiry? And this brings us to another point, I think, about inquiries. What's the purpose of an inquiry? Is it to actually figure out what is the problem, how can the problem be fixed, what can we do going forward? And I think many inquiries are literally based around that. I think that that's a thing that happens a lot. But another thing that a government might do is to set up an inquiry knowing that inquiries take time.
Yeah.
So if there's an issue that's really big in the news at the moment and you can't be on the wrong side of it, you can set up an inquiry. That inquiry will grind along in the background while people lose interest because something just happened on Twitter. And then you can sort of count on people's sort of not perfect, shall we say, ability to concentrate on one thing at a time, to allow it to move into the background, and by the time the report comes out, everyone's forgotten about it, up on the shelf it goes, and you have no political problem in not implementing those results.
Yeah, as we said at the beginning of the pod today, we said that Donald Trump will bring something in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
2 weeks is a very important, amount of time in politics.
Oh, it's an eternity, Chris.
It's beyond an eternity. I mean,
Yep.
Can you remember what happened 2 weeks ago? I mean,
I
hurricanes
can't.
are forgotten about
Yeah,
2 weeks ago.
exactly.
The California
There was
wildfire.
there was a hurricane in North Carolina. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was over 2 weeks ago,
That
so
was
it didn't
over
happen.
2 weeks ago.
So, yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
And how about the California wildfires? We have had zero coverage of it this week.
That's true, actually.
At least in the United Kingdom, we've had zero coverage.
Still happening, though.
It's still happening.
Still happening.
And
Yeah.
so
Still huge
so
fires.
Yeah, there is
Yep.
that is another benefit to having a government. It is sanctioned public inquiries that the government can then kind of control the amount of public interest in the matter.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're going to find an answer to it today. I'm on the side that parliaments or legislatures should have much more stronger ability to create commissions of inquiry or investigations, because sometimes you get really, really good ones, like the January 6th one,
Yep.
which was in depth and got
Yep.
tons of information that America learned about. And sometimes you can have really, really bad ones like Benghazi,
Oh, yeah.
which is just a hit piece on Hillary Clinton, and
Yep.
and nothing came out of it.
Found nothing and did nothing, but it existed simply to exist.
Yeah,
you know?
it existed to hurt her campaign,
Yep.
which eventually it did.
And that is going to be a potential danger with an inquiry that's not set up by the government, because those in the legislature who are not part of the government may very well have a political reason to
Yeah.
try to attack the party in power. On the other hand, if it is done by the government, well, the government has an incentive to do the inquiries to make it look good and not do the ones that don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
There's no perfect answer here.
I will put forward one, I think, idea, which
Okay.
is this: what makes an inquiry effective or not isn't so much where it originates, but rather how much attention people are paying to it, how much it matters to
Yeah.
voters. And I obviously have my opinions about what things should matter to voters. I'm not going to make a claim about that here. I'll just say, if the voters are really interested, and if they make a stink about it, and politicians know, and they know they need those votes to get reelected, I think you can expect inquiries to happen more quickly and to be more fully implemented, their recommendations when those recommendations are made. If people don't care, it won't happen, and if it does happen, it'll take a long time, and if it doesn't take a long time, no one's going to worry about the recommendations because people aren't paying attention.
Right.
All
Well,
right.
that's I think we've covered this subject. Sorry, if
Have
it's
we
a bit-
beaten this dead horse
we've
into the
beaten,
ground?
We've beaten this dead horse.
That's
It's a bit
another horse in the
meandering.
ground for us.
One of many. We have huge mounds of dirt in the
Yep.
backyard.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, we got fields, and just horses aplenty. So don't you worry, kids.
And plenty more horses to come in. As we love talking about politics, the
Yep.
the intricacies and the nerdiest stuff in politics as possible.
Yep.
But I believe we've rambled on enough for one day.
I think we have done. Thank you for joining us.
And as always,
I'm Dr. Patrick Armshaw,
and I'm Dr. Christopher Silverstein,
and we are doctors.
but not doctors.
Good night.